Okay, so organelles related to energy. There's two of them. One is the chloroplast. Chloroplasts have the ability to capture solar energy, energy from the sun, and convert it into chemical energy. It's kind of a misconception when you're in elementary school and you talk about photosynthesis, and they basically say, oh, it turns the sun's energy into food. Not exactly. It's not like you're building, the sun is literally turning into sugar. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the energy from the sun, and here's the little reaction, the energy from the sun is basically allowing the carbon dioxide and water to react with each other and make carbs, or in glucose, C6H12O6. This is being made, and the light is just providing the energy for those two things to react with each other. So it's, yes?
Catalyst?
Exactly. Light is sort of like the catalyst. Yes. So the light comes in, and then the reaction happens. So, and here's the thing. Now, carbs have energy in them. The energy is trapped in the bonds. In other words, you've taken, the light energy has now become the energy that's holding those 6 carbons together. Later, when this is eaten by an animal, the cell will break it down again. And when it breaks glucose down back into carbon dioxide and water, it's going to release the energy in the bonds. So it's taking the energy from the sun and it's trapping it in the chemical bonds that hold sugar together. That's what's really happening. We have a whole chapter on photosynthesis. So it's not important that you know the whole, oops, sorry, let me go back. It's not important that you know every single step. Just know that chloroplasts do photosynthesis, make sugars using sunlight. That's the bottom line. And only plants have chloroplasts. The part about them having a double membrane and having their own DNA and ribosomes is going to be significant in a minute. So bear with me, and we're going to come back to the fact that they have a double membrane and they have their own DNA and ribosomes. For now, chloroplasts, they capture solar energy. All right, what's the other energy-related organelle? Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. So mitochondria do a process called cell respiration. So a couple of other misconceptions. Some people think, particularly again when you learn this on an elementary level, that people are kind of think, okay, so plant cells have chloroplasts and animal cells have mitochondria. But that's not right. Because plant cells need energy too. So plant cells have both. They have chloroplasts and mitochondria. The only difference between plants and animals is that plants don't have to eat because the sugar, they make it themselves. Then they can use that sugar in the mitochondria for cellular respiration. We have to eat our sugar. We have to eat our carbs. And then we do cellular respiration. Plants need oxygen. That's another misconception. Plants need carbon dioxide and animals need oxygen. Plants need both. They need carbon dioxide to build sugar. Then they need oxygen to release the energy from the sugar. But they make more than they need. That's why we have all the extra oxygen on the planet. So they have a double membrane and they have their own DNA and ribosomes. And their reaction looks almost the opposite of photosynthesis. And again, this is where that misconception comes in. That we're taking sugar and we're turning it into ATP. We're not turning sugar into ATP. We're releasing the energy that was trapped in the sugar. The sugar is literally turning into water and carbon dioxide. But when the bonds break, energy is released. And when the energy is released, ATP captures it. And basically, so the energy, think of a dollar. You have a dollar bill, and the dollar bill is sort of like glucose. It contains a bunch of energy. But let's just say that you go to a gumball machine and it only takes quarters. Well, you have enough money to buy gum. There's enough energy there, but you can't use it because it's not in a form that can be used by the machine. In fact, it's more money than you need. So what happens in cell respiration is, think of making change. We're going to break our sugar that has all this energy. We're going to break it down into carbon dioxide and water, and we're going to release the energy and put it into little quarters. That's ATP. And now every cell can send ATP to all different places to do little reactions. So just like I could give 4 quarters out and you could go to all different places and buy your, different gumball machines and buy gum. And so we spread the energy out. So that's what's happening in the mitochondria. All right, which brings us to, here's a diagram, brings us to what's called the endosymbiotic theory. And the endosymbiotic theory is an explanation of where chloroplasts and mitochondria came from, how they became part of the cells. What it basically says is that there were larger cells, and those larger cells ate other cells. They ate small ones. They ate bacteria. But rather than digesting them, the bacteria became a part of them. Here's a diagram of what they're talking about. So they're saying there was a large cell, it engulfed a bacteria. That bacteria, instead of getting digested, just became a part of the cell. It sounds a little far-fetched. However, it is a theory, and there's 3 pieces of evidence that support it, that support that this could be what happened.
So can you repeat that? A larger cell ate a small cell, and then it became bacteria?
Right. In fact, like normally if a cell eats something, like let's say we're talking about your white blood cells, and your white blood cell eats a bacteria. Normally, that's going to go to the lysosomes and they're going to digest it. But what they're suggesting is there was a cell that lived on its own, it ate a bacteria, but rather than digesting it, the bacteria lived inside of it, and then it used the bacteria to basically carry out a particular reaction, which in this case, if it was a mitochondria, it would now allow the bacteria to use oxygen to produce ATP, which it couldn't do before. Let me show you the evidence. And I think you'll see why this theory actually does make a lot of sense. So, here's our first piece of evidence. The outer membrane on a mitochondria and on a chloroplast is similar to the ER of a cell, of a eukaryotic cell. But the inner membrane is similar to a bacterial membrane. Here's the thing, when a cell eats, when you eat, you think of this. You think of the food, it goes in your mouth, and now the food is here in your stomach. That's not how a cell eats. When a cell eats, a piece of the membrane surrounds the food particle, or whatever it's eating, and then that piece of membrane breaks off, and there's our food particle trapped in a piece of what was the cell membrane. Remember what I just told you, mitochondria and chloroplasts have a double membrane. The inner membrane is like a bacterial membrane. The outer membrane is more like the ER, which produces the cell membrane in a eukaryotic cell. So the implication is that's exactly what would happen if a cell did eat a bacteria and didn't digest it. It would have a double membrane, one from the original cell here, and then one from the bacteria that originally had that membrane. So that's the first piece of evidence that supports endosymbiotic theory. The second piece of evidence is the fact that they have their own DNA. The nucleus does not control reproduction of mitochondria and chloroplasts. I don't know that we fully understand how they know when to make copies of themselves. But we know that when a cell goes through mitosis, some of the mitochondria go one way, some go the other way, and then the 2 new cells that are made, as the cell grows, the mitochondria reproduce themselves. They reproduce when they want to reproduce. The nucleus has nothing to do with it. The nucleus has no control over them. Now, they can't survive on their own, although there are bacteria alive today that act very much like a mitochondria or a chloroplast. And lastly, when they do make protein, because they can make their own proteins, the proteins they make are very similar to proteins that bacteria make. Because bacterial DNA is different than ours, they tend to make different kinds of proteins than we make, and the mitochondria and chloroplasts make proteins that are different than what we make. Now, just a quick aside that kind of goes along with this, a quick comment. All the mitochondria in your body came from just one parent. Do you know which one? Nobody? Yeah, you got a 50-50, right? They all came from your mother. Here's why. Here's the egg cell, and it's got mitochondria in it, and all that other stuff. It's got chromosomes, it's got a nucleus, whatever. Here comes the sperm now to fertilize the egg. Now, the sperm needs power to swim. All the mitochondria are right here by the tail. That never goes into the egg. only the nucleus of the sperm cell goes into the egg. And they actually use this for DNA testing. Sometimes when they get a DNA sample, they can't get nuclear DNA because, well, each cell only has one nucleus. So you've got a less of a shot of getting nuclear DNA intact. But every cell has lots of mitochondria. They can actually take mitochondrial DNA and they've used it to trace a maternal history. In other words, we could track, you could dig up your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother on your mother's side, and her mitochondria should match yours. You could literally trace back your mom, her mom, her mom, her mom, her mom. You couldn't trace males that way. You know, if you were a male, you could trace your, on your mother's side. And they used it for, the Russian family that was like executed, like with Anastasia, the whole thing. They used mitochondrial DNA to identify bodies and to track like a girl that claimed that she was Anastasia or blah, blah, blah. They could use mitochondrial DNA to see if it matched the maternal bloodline, which it didn't. So it's just kind of a little note, kind of interesting. Okay, last thing, cytoskeleton, made of 3 parts. The first one is microtubules. Microtubules are made out of tubulin. That's the name of the protein that they're made out of. They're actually the largest piece of the cytoskeleton. They give the cell its shape. We used to think, back when I was in school in the 1800s, they taught us that the cytoplasm was this jelly-like material and everything was floating in the cytoplasm. Well, that would be the equivalent of if your lungs and your heart and your stomach were all floating around in you. So when you go jogging, they're all bouncing all over the place inside of your abdomen. That's not happening. Well, we now know that's not happening in cells either. The nucleus and the other parts are not just banging all over the place as you move. They're held in place. And so that's the cytoskeleton. So microtubules are very large. They do give the cell its main shape. They move the chromosomes, and they are involved, they're centrioles. Now, you don't have to know what centrioles are right now, but you may remember this. If you have a cell that's dividing, the chromosomes line up down the middle in mitosis, and then you have these spindle fibers, and then in the corners, there were these little T-shaped things. That's the centrioles. But if you don't remember that, it's okay. We'll come back to it later when we talk about cell reproduction. The parts in yellow, not going to be on a test. So don't worry, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. They have what's called a 9+0 structure. I'm going to show you a picture of that. The other thing that they compose are cilia and flagella. And again, the 9+2 structure is not on the test. On the old AP exam, they might have put something like that because it was more memorization. Now they don't expect you to know little nitpicky details like that. They want to see that you understand general concepts. So don't worry about writing down 9+0 and 9+2. It's not important. Just know that microtubules are made of tubulin. They also compose cilia and flagella and centrioles, and they give the cell its general shape.
Wait, what?
That they make up centrioles, cilia, and flagella.
Tubulin?
Tubulin is the name of the protein that composes them. They're called microtubules. They're made out of a protein called tubulin, and then they compose the centrioles, the cilia, and the flagella. And they give the cell its shape, just general ones sticking through the cell, kind of giving it a general shape. All right, again, don't worry about the stuff in yellow. I'm posting this PowerPoint today also, so you can get anything that you missed. Here's a picture. This is what they're talking about, like I said, the 9+2 structure. This is a cross-section of a flagellum, meaning if I took this, and I took the flagella, and I cut it like this, and I looked at it, cross-section, I would actually see 9 sets of tubules around. These would be tubes. They would be going like this. And then 2 tubes in the middle. And that would be my cross-section of an actual flagellum. Not important to know. The other one is the centrioles, showing that it's 9 around, but there's nothing in the middle. All right, last thing, microfilaments. They're made of actin. If you took anatomy, you probably learned about the sliding filament theory, or model. That when muscles contract, actin and myosin filaments, they go like this and they crunch together and then your muscle gets shorter and that pulls on your bone. Microfilaments are the specific part of the cytoskeleton that do that. So muscle cells in particular would have a lot of microfilaments. They also are the ones that when the cell pinches apart during mitosis, they would be the ones that did that. And then lastly, the intermediate filaments that are just intermediate in size. I don't know that I would ask you any questions about intermediate filaments. So that's everything. Once you've got that, you've got about 10 minutes left. It's Probably not enough time to work on the pre-lab. You should definitely get it downloaded if you haven't though. The one that's called Microscopes and Cells, because that's